Welcome. Thank you. So I noticed that throughout the presentations, people love to pick up their phones and take pictures of the presenters. We obviously have the trend of selfie. I'm thinking we need to get pictures of the audiences when we're up here now because of the use of social media and promoting. So everybody give me a big smile. WORKTECH15, cheers. All right. So Nic Milani, Director of Technology Solutions for Herman Miller. Got a lot of content to cover in a short amount of time. I want to give you a little bit about my background, and it's not from the furniture industry. In fact, my early experiences in the office kind of felt like this. I started at Motorola in a sea of cubes. I love what Arnold was talking about when we come out of school and we have all this creative space and we're asked to do all this team building and engineering program that I was in, and then we're stuffed into these little 8x8s and asked to go perform. The good news is I think most companies and most of the folks in this room have moved beyond this spot. So I don't want to try to analyze technology in this because I don't think we're here anymore. But it really is interesting how that shapes and forms the way you think about things. And ultimately, during this conversation, I want to talk about how do we put those people back in the front of the conversation? And how do we think about the friction we have with technology? Quick show of hands, who here thinks their technology works perfectly in their office space? And be honest. Marcia, I'd love to have a follow-up conversation with you because you're one of somebody at the back. Find me later because I've had conversations with over 200 customers in the last year and I haven't had a single person tell me that. And how does that happen? Why is it we're all universally frustrated with it? Well, we think that there's some data that's going on here, right? First off, we're spending a lot of money on technology, $900 billion on technology. Yet according to some Microsoft research when they were rolling out Link Room system, it takes 8 to 12 minutes to set up a meeting. Does that seem to resonate with everybody in the room? Can't call in, for some reason mine's not working. And so here's some quick math. The IRS says 2,000 hours a year is spent working, and that's, by the way, at 40 hours a week. 30% of your work week is spent in meetings, so that's 600 hours. Now, if you think about how many, let's just call each hour is a meeting, so 600 meetings a year, and if you lost 10 minutes to each of those, that's 6,000 minutes, and if each minute's $2 per minute, that's $12,000 per year per employee, okay? If each of you write down the number of employees you have in your company and multiply those numbers, that's how many dollars you're losing in productivity per year as a company. It's a problem, especially when you think about all the money we're spending to try to solve it. We've done recent research that says 2/3 of conference rooms are avoided because of some of those issues. Right? We've all had that experience. Everyone has that meeting space at their office that they hate to go to because they know it never works. Mine's Farnsworth, by the way, because if you kick the cable, the VGA thing goes all crazy on you. Right? So why is this? What's going on? Is it the technology's fault? Is technology failing us? We don't think so. We actually think it's not a technology issue. We think it's a design issue. It's a process issue. And what I'd like to explore is how everyone in this room can do their best work, yet we get poor experiences and poor outcomes for the people that inhabit the spaces. Sound good? By the way, we talk about learning differences. I'll tell you what starts to happen right before lunch is everybody's blood sugar starts to taco. So I'm trying to keep this energized, right? So what do I mean by the process is failing us? Well, if you write down these 3 circles, we'll come back to this as we walk through. The simple way to think about the way these buildings get built is the surroundings get erected. Folks like Herman Miller and Knoll and others start to stuff furnishings into them. And then usually as an afterthought, some AV company comes back in and stuffs a bunch of technology and IT stuff, right? Does that seem reasonable? Never mind the fact that that's describing the time an initial building's created. Let's think about when a building was built 15 years ago and how technology's evolved over time. If it doesn't make sense, think about the last time you were in a patient room in an old hospital, right? Room's been the same for 50 years, yet we've changed all we know about technology in those 50 years and medicine. Okay, so what's it look like in practice? I want to use a Midwestern company that just recently went through a massive project to update their spaces. And I'm going to show you how everybody in this group can do perfect work, A+ work, spend as much money as possible, and the experience will stink. So the building gets built, surroundings, right? They built the nicest finishes, Class A+. It's the greatest building in the city. Absolutely gorgeous. And one of the things as they go through their programming is they standardized on a 6-person conference room, roughly 150 of them, all right? And so then the interior design team starts to work and we start to think about furnishings. So they put a beautiful, by the way, I changed the furniture. This isn't the furniture they used to protect everyone that was involved. They put a beautiful veneer top and gorgeous chairs and they spent the most money they possibly could on it. Absolutely beautiful. And the last part was the AV and IT come in to put the technology in, right? Layer in the technology. Now, the two things for them, they had 140 remote locations, so the video conferencing was really important, and they wanted to go paperless, right? Makes sense. We've all heard this from our clients. So we put the dual interactive displays, 60-inch, with a there we go, with a video camera up top and a whiteboard over here on the side and a Polycom in the middle. Great. By the way, plenty of money right there, right? So everyone spent as much money as possible. What happens? Well, in order to figure out what happened day one, we have to take the user's perspective. And I want you to think about when you all walked into this room. You start scanning the room and analyzing everything you see. You don't care what purchasing agent bought what commodity from whom, right? So, for instance, everybody at the round tables, I can bet money I know who showed up last. Robert, I'm going to pick on you here, Bob. You showed up last because you're sitting on the end of the table that's facing me. The people that get here first always sit square with their shoulders to the wall, right? Yes, you did, didn't you? It always happens. Last year when they were all round tables, by the way, you can see everybody turning and sitting awkwardly and you've got your back to people. It's not natural. So when we think about the human experience in this room, let's think about when we walk in the door. What do we see? Well, the first thing we're confronted with is the fact that that's the screen that's going to turn the room on. And I've got a sea of chairs to get through to get there. If I were a betting man, which I'm not because I'm bad at it, I would bet anybody in this room that this seat gets sat in first, 95% plus time. Anybody want to venture a guess why? Large group. Person to turn on the screen, there's one factor. Anybody else? Yep.
They can see the screen and write on the whiteboard.
Bingo. Anybody ever used an interactive display before? Anybody ever been asked to use an interactive display before? And the hairs stand up on the back of your neck as you think, oh shit, I don't want to look dumb. Right, this is the free comedic part. Right, so that part, so it's a safety net. What I want is, I sit here for three reasons. I sit here because I got to turn the room on. I sit there because I know I can't use the damn thing for a whiteboard, so I have the whiteboard behind me. And then there's also the fact that my back's to the wall and I'm seeing the door. These are actually deep ergonomic principles at play here. Let's take another perspective. Once I sit there and run that, what happens to the person that sits here? I get this experience. I have a rather large head. You don't want to sit behind me in that seat, right? By the way, this is pretty good because I'm moving around, but if I was just to hop down here and present down here, you're going to start to see, you're doing Melissa, you're starting to, head crane. I'm sorry, I called you Marsha, really. I don't know why. Melissa, and people will start to bob and weave. People at the back of the room right now are getting a lower cognitive performance than the people at the front, but if I get too close, I'll pull you out of your cognitive performance zone too. Starts to get awkward. Let's think about the awkward whiteboarder over there, right? From the remote view, that seat that was in the front, why the hell is that there? Who's going to sit there? By the way, you can't get it out of the room. So the entire time you're in that meeting, you're fighting over that chair. Anybody had the experience where they're tripping over a chair the entire time they're trying to whiteboard or meet? Right? So at the end of the day, what I'd argue to you is you can only get three people in that space, maybe a fourth. Talk to the customer. They were trying to figure out why they had such a bad experience, why they're getting all these negative ratings after they spent all this money. They said, great, Nick, thank you for telling me we screwed up. Please leave, and I left. And they did 3 months of utilization studies on 6-person conference rooms, 150 of them, 3 months. Continual observation. What percentage of the time did they see 6 people in the room? 10, 0, 0% of the time. What percent of the time do they see 3 people in the room? 80% of the time. Yet, what we drive on is density as being the most important factor, and we lead it through that process. Also, interestingly enough, they never saw the whiteboard pen removed from the digital display. So we're all in this together. We're all making these mistakes, right? So what's the problem? Well, we think it's obvious that there's an issue of alignment. As you think about those 3 circles on your page that I asked you to draw. And the first, we think there's 2 core issues under that alignment problem. The first is that there's no shared approach to workplace design. Right? Each one of those groups is fundamentally going a different way. And more specifically, the technologists are really looking at it in a different way. And so if you think about it in an abstract sense, each of us are working under different bosses, different key performance indicators, different budgets. We're motivated by different things, right? You complicate that with the concept of language. Now, I got to tell you, I joined Herman Miller about 3 years ago. I came from the tech world. I used to do mobile computing before that, Motorola before there. And, you know, day 2, morning 1, I'd relocated, a new industry. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm kind of out on the edge here. And we're sitting doing training, and we're going around introductions. And somebody says, what do you do to this young lady? She goes, I'm a program manager on a screens program. And I swear to you, I'm missing that gene that like limits what I say. I go, holy shit, Herman Miller makes screens? Like, what size? 60-inch, 70-inch, LCD, plasma? Where's our discount? Because when you say to somebody from Motorola and you ask them what a screen is, I think this is a screen. It literally took somebody 45 minutes to try to explain to me what the hell this thing was until I physically saw it. I didn't even know. Guys, you have different bosses. Your clients are showing up. They don't want to look stupid in front of you. This is a real big issue is language. The tech industry has taken the architectural industry's language and changed all the meanings. So the most important meeting you have in the beginning of a discussion is the programming, where we start to assess where people are going to sit and how we're going to do it. We start to lay spaces out. Well, who does the IT folks send? We're going to program. What do we program? COBOL, C++, SQL? We're going to develop applications. What the hell's an application to a technologist? It's the app that runs on your cell phone, right? So if there's one thing you come away from today, realize that when you're getting the IT, because I know a lot of you are saying, we bring the technologists up front in the discussion, that's great, you are doing the right thing. Realize, though, they don't want to look dumb, and they don't necessarily know what the hell you're saying, right? So if that's the first issue, the second one is where things really start to break down for us. And that's the issue of a shared understanding of people and their work, okay? And what I would argue is that if you take your first 2 bubbles, your surroundings and your furnishings, and we think about all the lessons and buildings in the last 30, 40 years around activity-based work. Let's say everybody in the room is brilliant at that. The fact of the matter, IT hasn't learned that. Which one do you want? Do you want the individual or do you want the group solution? Right? So if you start to think about the way that IT, and they need their standardization, they have 2,000 employees that need to be accessed their information at any given time. They have one standard for that. And what starts to really break down is in the group solution. And part of the thing that was ridiculous about the example I showed was that dual 60-inch monitors, they put that in every single group setting because they don't understand that we're doing different things and we need different tools to do them. Make sense? So how do we turn the corner on this? Well, we think at Herman Miller that living office is our version and our approach to activity-based work, and we think this framework allows us to start to solve this problem. It's really not about us producing more technology and trying to sell you more widgets. The silver bullet approach isn't working. So what does that look like? Well, I'm going to explain the living office in a little bit different way, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because we've spent a lot of discussion on activity-based work, but think of it as cities. Let's think about what's fundamental to all of us as human beings and why I can walk into any one of your homes or go into anybody's home anywhere around the world and fundamentally understand what's going on in the space. It's because there's certain attributes that's fundamental to us as human beings. When we start to zoom into these different places, we also start to see that the things that are unique to each of us. My palette's different than your palette, with the spaces that we use, the interdependency of our work. It starts to drive to these very different looks and feel within a living office. But they all serve their purpose of the people that are in it. If I zoom in any closer, I start to think about what's unique to each are the work activities we do throughout our day. So warm up, cool down. As soon as we leave this presentation and go to lunch, you'll all cool down, which you'll talk about what I did right and what I did wrong. Warm up was the drive in. We go into the meeting space and maybe we do a show and tell, which is what this is right now, right? Presenting to a large group of people. We might also go back to our individual workspace and start to process and respond. Make sense? In each of those spaces, in each of those settings, the missing link historically, though, has been about how do we make them more purposeful? How do we understand what this person and this person is trying to do and all the tools that surround them and make them work together? It's as simple as when you walk into the room and you scan the room for where the VGA cable is, right? You just walk into the room and you scan where the power plug is. If you don't believe me, go to Starbucks. All of a sudden, this became socially acceptable. 10 years ago, you would have been, okay, a different discussion over a drink later. So how do we make these settings more purposeful? Well, we think it's about experience design. And it's about understanding the relationship between the surroundings, the furnishings, and the tools, not the technology, the tools, and bringing those together in a way that's based on the human experience of work and we can improve that. So let's start to go through what this looks like. In graphical form, you can draw the 3 circles together now. So it makes sense that if I manipulate any of the elements of this room, it starts to change the experience, right? If all of you were standing height tables, if I was down there, it starts to adjust and change the outcomes. But it's actually based on a deeper understanding of people and what we call the cognitive ergonomics and the physical ergonomics, and then the social ergonomics, me as an individual and us as a collective group. So I'm balancing all 3 of these ergonomic concepts, social, physical, and cognitive. Now, we've always thought about physical ergonomics at Herman Miller. But what I started to talk about when I stood down lower and the performance of folks at the back of the room was more about cognitive ergonomics. And when I start to think about the hairs standing up on the back of my neck as I approach that technology to try to use it for the first time, I'm talking about social ergonomics. Social ergonomics, like I don't want to look like an idiot in front of my peers. So, making sense how I'm linking these 2 together? See how we take these abstract concepts like ergonomics and fundamental human needs, by the way, that's what's in the middle. All of us have a need for security, autonomy, achievement, purpose, belonging, status. Nobody wants to talk about status, by the way. That's what we've designed our spaces historically for the last 40 years on. The higher you get, the bigger the office you get. That's status, right? So how do we communicate status in different ways in spaces? But what I can start to do is start to link those 2 things together, and we start to talk about these different things. First is this idea of posture. So if my activity is show and tell, presenting to people, the posture relationship of you being seated and me standing up here is actually great. It means you're less likely to interrupt me. Now, if I was sitting back there at the table, with you guys and presenting from over there, it'd be a totally different experience because we're all on the same level. We're starting to think about how does posture relate to the outcomes in what everyone calls collaboration, right? You guys want your people to be more collaborative, more creative? Bring them to a standing height desk. You want them to actually interact with that user interactive display? Bring them to a standing height desk. Because if any of you, especially in the middle of the room, stood up right now and walked out, you'd communicate to everybody else in the room, uh-oh, something went wrong, right? Which hopefully won't happen. Sight lines. I was pointing out the example in the room of how people at the back of the room are craning your neck. I see you right back there. Plenty of people are doing it. You ever had that experience where you're in the back of the room and all you can see is the person's head in front of you? As opposed to starting to think about how we arrange those tools and technology so we can clearly see it and improve the outcome. We start to think about things like circulation, that awkwardness when somebody's standing way too close to you, and how you can't think of anything except for just step away from me, please. This poor woman here. Versus having plenty of space. Circulation also affects the ability, when we talk about creating ideas, the ability of people to move around and get up to the screen to actually interact with it. So we're starting to link these things together. And if we go back to the example, when we think about this customer, we'd start to think about it in a very different way. And what would we suggest? Well, first off, we're not going to change the walls. They just built the facility, right? And the second part is that they do need to connect with those remote colleagues. So make the technology a priority. Put it on the wall. And once the technology is on the wall, think about a table that relates to that technology. Now, you'll notice there's only 4 chairs in the room because that's all you can really get in there once you put all the other objects, right? We're overstuffing these spaces, guys. Oh, sorry. In the rare case where you want to have 6 people, we suggest putting 2 chairs in the landing, similar materials. That way people can roll them in the rare case they actually want to have 6 people in the space. So you start to work towards the norm, but also understand what's happening. So now from a human experience standpoint, I walk in and I have a clear pathway to that screen to turn it on. When I sit at one of the chairs, I can see the content, but I can also see the folks in the room. I'm not trading off the virtual from the physical, right? If I think about the remote participants, because nobody's going to use that digital whiteboard the way it's designed today, people will start to actually look at the whiteboard and see it and see what you're presenting. Does that make sense? A lot of wasted dollars in the existing system, by the way. So at the end of the day, we can get 4 people consistently and have a great user experience, which is what it's all about. And nobody likes to spend the money, put the energy in, and then all of a sudden show up day 1 and you get crucified for it. So at the end of the day, from a takeaway standpoint, it's really about alignment, okay? We think that we all need to work together to understand our people and the work they're achieving and they're trying to achieve. We also need to start to have a shared approach to design, which means bringing the technologist to the front of the conversation when you're doing your programming discussion, realizing that when they're in the meeting, they may not actually understand what you're talking about. By the way, it's really hard to find technologists that actually understand people in their work. So a lot of times they're about science and engineering, right? Which is fine. I was at Motorola for years. It's great. It progresses a lot of things. But you want to get a strategic technology thinker in the room early so it can help. And the fact of the matter is for the designers, you're not going into these development projects with all the facts. Because you don't know what's coming down the road from a technology standpoint, you're oftentimes designing spaces with only half of the criteria that you really need. Okay? So bring those folks ahead. And then once you get to that point, think about, again, how the surroundings, furnishings, and tools, including technology, work in concert to elevate. What we're going to continue to do is take the living office framework, which starts to become like an operating system for the way people work, and work with world-class companies to start to think about how does their technology interact with that space as well. And so as companies start to create the next generation interactive displays that are much better, how do we have to change the actual physical environment to encourage people to actually interact with the technology? And that's the approach Herman Miller is taking that puts the human being back in the front. So thanks. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Questions? Comments? Prefer questions? Yeah.
Investment over a period of time. Technology is changing every 6 months. Mm-hmm. There seems to be a challenge there in regards to how you keep up with the furniture changes, with the financial obligations, where it might not be as easy if you're trying to spread that money over 10 years.
I
Any
love
solutions there?
Yeah, there's a couple things to unpackage there. First off, this is the reason why you don't want to embed changing technologies in furniture. Because we want our furniture to last 15 years, sometimes it lasts 30 years. That's not a bad thing in and of itself. Once we realize that and once you appreciate the framework and the interaction, is anybody in here in IT, technologists? A few folks. The takeaway for you folks, by the way, is the next time you go to invest in the next generation technology, don't only set aside budget for the technology, think about the furniture in the room it's going in. That's the part where we start to get the budgets working together. We got to break down those silos. So if you told me as an IT professional that you're going to take all of your conference rooms and move to an interactive display, but you've historically had static displays, I have to rethink all the cabinets that sit under the static displays. I have to rethink the posture. Most of our conference rooms are seated height. But if I want people to go up and interact, I want them at a standing height because that'll improve. So there's a bit where that shared understanding of the project actually leads to more collaboration. I oftentimes tell CIOs, if your first investment is going to be with the technology and the consultant, your second call should be to the architect. Because you should think about how the hell people are going to use this stuff. Does that help? Great. Any other questions? Oh, I'm getting the hook. All right, thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.